Good evening. This is Troy Fullerton, and I'd like to talk a little bit tonight about learning to speak a foreign language. And what I'm specifically looking at and focusing on right now is the phenomenon that a lot of people go through where they've studied grammar, they've learned a lot of words, they've really applied themselves and learned how to manipulate things, conjugate their verbs, learned all of this stuff, but they still can't speak. Whenever they try to say something, they constantly are fighting to get the words out, and maybe there are a lot of deficits in their vocabulary despite everything that they've learned so far. The first thing I want to explain is that unless you have grown up in some area where you were surrounded by Spanish, we'll say, because I'm focused on Spanish right now, some place where you were surrounded by the language and could pick it up by osmosis and learn it in a very natural environment, you're not alone. You're going to go through this. Everybody goes through it. So I've gone through it. A lot of people have. I want to assure you in the first place that this phase is going to pass, but you can't go over it. You can't go under it. You can't go around it. You've just got to go through it. So what I want to encourage you to do is to keep fighting to get the words out. Keep fighting to say what you need to say in different contexts. Now, there are some things we can do to help. In the first place, we need to continue, even after we've studied vocabulary, studied grammar, learned how to form sentences, and learned how to, form sentences according to certain sentence patterns. We still need to expose ourselves to the language. Now, one of the most important things that you can do as a Spanish student is read. Read a lot. Now, I recommend reading contemporary novels, news articles, short stories, things written in contemporary language. I recommend keeping a list for yourself of new words and phrases that you're learning and keeping them someplace handy. Someplace where you have ready access to them. That might be on a computer file. That might be in a notebook. You decide, but keep them handy so you can review them regularly. I know that it is frowned on to use flashcards for acquiring a second language. However, there's a right way to do it. When you learn new expressions and you want to learn how to use them, you want instant recall on them. You can look at them on flashcards. You can use an Anki-based flashcard program, or you can create your own flashcards just with simply using index cards if you want to. Whatever you do, if you use something like that, you should go from both English to Spanish and Spanish to English and practice going back and forth. And don't forget to use some phrases, throw them in there too. But reading and getting that vocabulary down is going to make it so much easier. Oftentimes you'll find that something you've just learned to use recently will come up in conversation pretty soon. And it's just funny how that works. Probably reticular activation. You've just studied something, and so all of a sudden you realize I've got an opportunity to use that expression. But be that as it may, oftentimes that will come up and you'll have an opportunity to use it. Now, when you use those expressions in your own speech, what's going to happen is it's going to become a part of you. You just said it. You just used it. All right. Now I'm focused on oral fluency right now. So once again, you learn to speak by speaking. But what you're going to need to do here is you're going to need to get yourself in situations in which you have to use the language. And let me give you a few hints here. All right. One of the things you can do is you can prep ahead of time for vocabulary that you're going to anticipate using. Let's try a simple example. Let's say that you're going to a Mexican restaurant where you know that the waiters all speak Spanish and you want to try your Spanish out. Now, this is just a simple example, but it's something that you might use. Well, what are you going to need to be able to say? You're going to need to be able to say things like, can I have a straw? Could I have a refill on my Pepsi? Could I have another fork? I would like blah, 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 whatever it is that you would like. Learn how to say those things ahead of time. Learn how to say things like, this is good. Everything's fine. Could I have the check, please? All of these things, and of course, this is a simple example, kind of a beginner's example, but all of these things that are likely to come up, you can practice ahead of time. Now, obviously, you can't predict everything, but you can predict a lot of things. You can plan to have a conversation about the weather. You can plan to have a conversation about what you're doing on the weekend. You can plan for some generic things just to be able to say them and talk about them. Did you just buy a new car? How about learning to say, I just bought a new car, and saying the brand, and maybe talking about the gas mileage it gets, or talk about finding a bargain on things. All of this requires you to look up a little bit of vocabulary ahead of time, maybe verify how to say things, get that down, and then you're ready to go. Then you go and use it. After you use it, you start to think, well, this is fun. And all of a sudden, you've made it yours. The sooner you start having fun with this, the sooner it really does become your own second language. Now, another hint, another tip. If you use Google Translate or one of those translation apps on your phone, a lot of times you'll find them, they will have a feature where you can hit the microphone and simply speak into your phone and get an instant translation. Now, I know they're not always accurate. They're a lot better now than they used to be, but just for a word or a simple phrase, a lot of times those are going to be really good to give you a way to say things. Another thing you can use is a more in-depth one like word reference or something, where there are forums where you can actually ask how to use words and really get down to how to distinguishing between different forms of the same word, or different definitions of the same word, and you can drill down and make sure that you're using exactly the form that you want to use. But building that vocabulary, going out and using it, that's going to help. Reading is going to help. Getting into situations where you have to use the language is going to help. Preparing the vocabulary that you're going to need in different contexts is going to help. All of this is going to result in you developing that fluency that you want to develop. Now, you've got to have kind of a can-do attitude. A lot of things, there's nothing wrong with rote studying, but a lot of things are better caught than taught, especially when it comes to usage. So I want to challenge you with one more tip here. Whether it's reading or whether it's speaking, when you hear people say things or you read things, think, how would I express this same thought in English? Take note of that and find an excuse to use it. You're thinking, all right, if they say this, now what would I say in English? Or if I'm reading something, how would this be written in English? Just phrases, just words, just a few things. Think, okay, zero in on that. I don't want to just understand it. I want to make it my own so that I can reproduce that when I want to. Take note of it. You can, if you're using a flashcard program or something, you might want to include that in a flashcard program, especially if you're afraid it's going to evaporate. Now, one more thing. A lot of times when you learn new things in your foreign language, in your second language, you're going to know that you've just learned it, but it's not going to quite feel settled. After you go home and sleep on it and get up and try to recall it and use it the next day, you're going to feel the difference. It's like your brain defragments or something and sorts all that stuff in. And even if you forget some of it and have to go and look it up again, that still works. It's still just kind of, it's like the cement has to harden. And so that helps that process. When you study, try to find ways to study your vocabulary such that you're having to pull it out of your brain. Just looking over your notes, oftentimes it's not really going to be helpful. Of course, you have to front load it somehow, but practice spelling it, practice writing it, practice recall. Like if you're not using flashcards, you just have it on a piece of paper, cover up the English, read the Spanish, and try to figure out Try to remember what that word means in English, then go the other direction. Cover up the Spanish, say it in English, and go the other way too. You'll be surprised how quickly you develop that vocabulary. Always remember to go from general to specific. You want to learn how to say clothes before you learn how to say shirt, pants, socks, dress. You want to learn how to say bird before you learn how to say blue jay, eagle, robin, sparrow. And food items the same way. You want to learn how to say fruit before you learn how to say grapefruit, orange, grapes, and I could go on and on. But learning it that way helps you to get it all accommodated in your head and makes it that much easier to get back to it when you want to. But the main thing I can say is just keep fighting that battle, keep fighting to get the words out. Don't worry about it. Don't let it stress you out. If you have a hard time doing it, just keep doing it. It's going to come. It's going to come. You're going to reap what you sow when it comes to learning how to use your foreign language.